The moment the K-9 officer barked, everyone froze. It wasn't a warning. It was recognition. A homeless man, dragged into court for trespassing, had just whispered his name, Jonas Remington. The dog, Echo, stopped cold, then gently walked over, tail low, and licked his hand. Why would a retired police dog break protocol for a stranger? What the judge discovers next will leave the entire courtroom in stunned silence. Tap subscribe, drop a comment if you believe true heroes are never forgotten, and don't miss this story. Flagstaff, Arizona. Mid-December. The wind howled like a ghost through the ponderosa pines, whipping powdered snow across the empty roads and layering the already muted city in sheets of silence. The sky was a slate-gray canvas, painted with heavy clouds threatening to drop another storm before dawn. Most residents stayed inside, huddled beneath heating vents, sipping on warm drinks while fires crackled in stone hearths. Jonas Remington stood alone behind the skeletal remains of an old firehouse on Aspen Avenue, his hunched figure wrapped in a fraying olive-green military jacket 2 sizes too large, patched in places with duct tape and stubborn dignity. His face, wind-burned and carved with years of wear, bore a scruffy white beard and a deeply lined brow that rarely lifted. A dented army-issued duffel bag lay by his feet, partly buried in snow. Jonas, known once by the call sign Hawk, in a time now buried by years and silence, had no one waiting for him, no home to go to. At 72, his body bore both the visible and invisible scars of war. A subtle limp pulled his right foot inward, a gift from a roadside IED in Kandahar. Beneath the layers of clothing, his chest still carried shrapnel fragments too risky to remove. His eyes, sharp but tired, flickered around the boarded-up building as he slid into the half-open service door. The room beyond smelled of old ashes and damp wood. He crouched beside a broken boiler, hoping it would offer the illusion of warmth. But the quiet didn't last. "Hey, what the hell do you think you're doing?" A voice barked, slicing through the quiet like a blade. The flashlight beam landed squarely on Jonas's face. Officer Dean Marley, a tall, broad-shouldered man in his late 40s, with a weather-worn leather jacket stretched over his patrol uniform, stood in the doorway, gun holstered but hand ready. Dean had been with Flagstaff PD for 15 years, known for being quick to act, but not without compassion. He was fair, though rough-edged from too many late-night calls that ended with overdoses or frostbitten transients. Jonas didn't respond. He raised his hand slowly, palm up, not in protest, but in surrender. He didn't resist when Dean cuffed him. As the officer led him through the snow, Jonas looked up briefly at the sky, thick with snowflakes that danced like memories before melting into the frozen earth. Back at the precinct, the lobby was mostly empty except for the hum of a coffee machine and the soft tapping of Officer Sarah Bellamy, who sat behind the front desk. Sarah, 32, was one of the youngest officers on the force. Petite but wiry, with curly red hair tied into a no-nonsense bun, she wore thick-rimmed glasses and always seemed like she was on the verge of saying something sarcastic, but never did. Sarah had joined the force shortly after her younger brother went missing during a hiking trip in Coconino Forest. Though officially off-duty, she often volunteered for extra shifts to avoid going home to a quiet apartment filled with unanswered questions. As Jonas was let in, Sarah glanced up and blinked. "Trespassing?" she asked. Behind the old fire station, Dean grunted, sleeping near a busted boiler. Lucky he didn't freeze to death. Jonas sat on the intake bench, his hands still cuffed. He said nothing. His eyes stayed low. "I'll call it in," Sarah said, then hesitated. "Want me to bring Echo?" Dean frowned. "Why?" He didn't resist. "Just protocol. Ever since the shoplifting case last week," she shrugged. "Besides, Echo needs a walk." Jonas's ears twitched slightly at the name, but he didn't speak. Sarah rose, walked down the hall, and returned moments later with Echo. Echo was a striking sable-colored German shepherd, 7 years old, lean and muscled, with intelligent amber eyes. A retired military K-9 recently adopted into the department, Echo had served in 2 overseas tours, trained for search, protection, and recognition. His movements were crisp and efficient, but he bore a deep scar under his right eye and a nick on his left ear, badges earned from real battlefields, not just suburban arrests. Since retirement, he'd bonded only with one person, Chief Catherine Doyle. Catherine Doyle, 46, was the only woman to ever hold the role of police chief in Flagstaff. Tall and commanding with steel-gray eyes and a voice that cut through rooms, she dressed in pressed navy suits and never raised her tone unless she intended to finish a sentence with action. A former Marine herself, she rarely spoke of her past. After her brother was killed in the Middle East, she left combat for community. Some said she ran from grief. Others said she walked straight into a fight only she could finish. At that moment, she wasn't present, but her dog was. Echo walked beside Sarah into the intake room. As soon as he stepped through the door, his ears twitched. He halted mid-step. Sarah didn't notice. Echo, scent check. The command was simple, routine. But Echo didn't move toward the evidence locker or the officer's side. Instead, his eyes locked onto Jonas. And then he growled. Dean immediately reached for his belt. Whoa! But then Echo's growl stopped. The tension dissolved, his tail still then gently wagging. The dog took one cautious step forward, then another. And then, to everyone's stunned silence, Echo walked past the officers, past the desk, and directly to Jonas, his head bowed low, nose sniffing softly. Then, Echo licked the back of Jonas's hand. The room fell quiet. Jonas remained motionless, but his lip trembled. Dean muttered, "What the hell?" Sarah looked between the dog and the man. Echo doesn't do that. Not even with me. Jonas finally lifted his eyes. His voice, cracked from cold and disuse, whispered, "Hello, boy." And Echo responded with a soft, whimpering sound, one he'd never made before on duty. From the hallway, the sharp echo of heels clicked toward them. Catherine Doyle had arrived. Catherine Doyle stood at the threshold of the intake room, her frame rigid, eyes fixed on the improbable scene before her. Her boots, polished and black, made no further sound as she stepped into the silence. Echo was sitting at the feet of the disheveled man in cuffs, calm, composed, loyal in a way that was unmistakable. Her jaw tightened. Catherine was a woman who did not indulge in disbelief. She was pragmatic to a fault, shaped by years of military order and the unbearable weight of personal loss. Tall and angular, with a presence that often made entire rooms fall silent, she carried herself with discipline carved from grief. Her shoulder-length brunette hair was pinned back, not out of fashion, but control. Control was all she had when the world unraveled. "Echo, back," she commanded softly. But Echo didn't budge. The dog looked at her, then at Jonas, then gave a quiet huff and placed a paw on a man's foot. Catherine blinked, once, then again, unable to shake the sudden tremor beneath her ribs. Jonas met her gaze. He said nothing. Sarah stepped back, looking between the two with widened eyes. "Ma'am, something's going on." Echo's never done that with anyone. Catherine didn't respond immediately. She crouched beside Echo and gently ran her hand down his back, fingers pressing into the familiar rhythm of his fur. "We got him out of a military shelter. His previous handler was classified. He wouldn't bond with anyone for 6 months. Until me." Jonas tilted his head slightly. "That dog ever have a scar under his right rib?" Catherine looked up. Her eyes narrowed. "How do you know that?" Jonas didn't answer, but his silence was louder than words. Catherine stood, straightened her uniform, and said, "Bring him into interrogation too. And get that man a blanket." Dean hesitated, but Sarah was already moving. She returned a few moments later with a beige wool blanket and gently placed it over Jonas's shoulders. "You're not going to run, are you?" she asked lightly. Jonas offered her the ghost of a smile. "Too old. Too cold." Inside the dim interrogation room, Jonas sat at the table, hands now uncuffed. The room was plain, 2 chairs, 1 table, a flickering overhead light that buzzed faintly, as though tired of bearing witness to too many confessions. Echo lay down beside him, pressed against the man's leg as if guarding something precious. Catherine entered a moment later with a manila folder and a cup of black coffee. She slid both onto the table and sat across from Jonas, folding her hands. "What's your name?" "Already gave it." "Give again." "Jonas Remington. Staff Sergeant, U.S. Army, retired." She opened the folder, revealing a dog-eared military ID card with the same name. A face nearly unrecognizable compared to the one across from her. Clean-shaven, alert, uniformed, proud. "This was in your bag." Jonas nodded. Catherine leaned back. "Jonas. Hawk. Remington. Kandahar. Operation Broken Talon. June 15th, 2011. I got a reaction. His back stiffened. His eyes, dulled by age and weather, sharpened just slightly. "You were there." "My brother was." A silence stretched between them like a drawn wire. Jonas broke it. "Name?" "Second Lieutenant Jeremy Doyle. Communications Officer." Jonas's mouth twisted. Redhead. Too young. Carried poetry books in his vest. Catherine's throat tightened, but she held it together. "You remembered him?" "I remember all of them." Outside, the wind battered against the windows. Sarah peeked through the door's glass panel, then quietly slipped back into the hallway. She wasn't nosy, but she wasn't heartless either. "You trained K-9 units overseas," Catherine continued, pulling out an old military report, including one named Echo. Echo wasn't his first name. He was Bravo 7. They renamed him after his last op. "What?" Jonas let out a breath that fogged in the cold room. "Because he came back alone. Everyone else didn't." Catherine looked down at the page before her. There were only fragments. Reports redacted with black bars, sentences that ended mid-thought. But the pieces matched. A firefight near a supply outpost. Unexpected ambush, 6 Kia, 1 injured handler. Jonas. Exfiltration by medevac under heavy fire. Dog returned. Handler disappeared after medical leave. Jonas stared at his hands. "They said I had survivor's guilt. But that ain't the name for it. It's memory that don't shut up." Catherine's voice softened. "And after that, I got home. BA lost my paperwork. My wife waited for 2 years, then packed up. Job market wasn't kind to a man with a limp and a head full of gunfire. Moved from motel to shelter to nowhere." She sat in silence for a long moment. "My brother died 2 days after writing us a letter. Said someone saved his team. A dog handler who wouldn't leave the wounded behind." Jonas didn't speak. Catherine added, almost too quietly, "He said the man deserved a medal, not a couch in a homeless shelter." At that moment, the door creaked open. A new face entered. Deputy Chief Raymond Fields, a heavy-set man in his 60s with silver hair, spectacles perpetually sliding down his nose, and a voice that sounded like it had chewed gravel. He was a desk man, rarely out of the office, but known for being exact and cautious. "Chief, I ran the name," he said, glancing at Jonas. "Records match. Discharged with honors. PTSD diagnosis. Claim denied due to clerical error. Never corrected." Catherine stood slowly. "Thank you, Ray." Ray looked at Jonas, then at Echo. He gave a low whistle. "That dog thinks you walk on water." "He used to think I could," Jonas said. Ray chuckled softly, then left, his boots thudding down the hall. Jonas reached down, scratched Echo gently behind the ear. "Never thought I'd see him again. Never thought he'd remember. They never forget the people who treated them like more than tools," Catherine said. A pause. "Do you want help, Jonas?" He looked at her, wary. "Not a pity handout. Help. Real. With VA paperwork. With housing. With maybe some peace." Jonas said nothing, but his fingers, knotted with age and cold, tightened slightly around the coffee cup. That was answer enough. Outside the window, the snow had stopped. The quiet of the precinct was pierced only by the rhythmic ticking of the wall clock in the records office. It was 4:47 a.m. Most of Flagstaff still slept beneath a thin sheet of melting snow, the kind that stuck to boots but offered no warmth. Inside Interrogation 2, the heat was beginning to catch up, casting a faint haze in the corners of the glass. Jonas sat motionless, Echo curled at his feet, eyes closed but ears twitching at every hallway sound. A door creaked open. Catherine Doyle re-entered, a sealed envelope in hand, her expression unreadable. Her eyes flicked briefly to Echo, then back to Jonas. You remember these? She asked, dropping a worn pair of leather gloves onto the table. Jonas blinked slowly. They were tan, military grade. The left one split slightly at the thumb seam, like a scar. He reached forward, but hesitated before touching them. Where did he find those? Echo carried them into the main office an hour ago. Dug them out of your duffel. Jonas stared at them. Then, without another word, he picked up the left glove and ran a weathered thumb across the inner lining. Stitched there, still faint, were the initials JR. I wore those the day Bravo. 7 almost died, he said at last. He was still a pup then. We weren't supposed to be there that morning. Intel had the compound cold. It wasn't. Catherine remained still, listening. We went in quiet. For men, 1 dog. Me, Gunnery Sergeant Holland, Lieutenants Doyle, and Cruz, and Echo. Except he wasn't called that yet. He didn't even have a name, just a serial. The ambush started 20 seconds after the breach. Someone had tipped them off. It was like a goddamn hornet's nest exploded. Jonas's voice was steady, but a shadow passed behind his eyes. Holland took the first hit. Then Cruz. Your brother. He was trying to relay a fallback position. I saw him go down next to the radio. Echo stayed by him, barking his head off, trying to drag his flak vest. That mutt wasn't trained for that. Not yet. He just did it. Jonas set the glove down. I ran through a wall of fire, pulled them both out. Radio was trashed. Carried your brother to a transport truck, then doubled back for Echo. He was cornered in a supply closet, snarling like a banshee. I've already taken a bullet through the hind leg, but he still lunged at me like I was the enemy. Jonas smiled for the first time, small, aching. I said, it's me, damn it. Huck. I came back. And he stopped. Just like that. Limped toward me, collapsed in my arms. Never forgot. Catherine's throat tightened. My family never knew what really happened. We were told Jeremy died bravely. There were no details. Jonas nodded slowly. They told me to shut up. PTSD, they said. Not a good look to have a broken handler talking to ghosts and a mutt who wouldn't let go of a dead soldier's gear. Across the hallway, Sarah Bellamy was listening again, pretending to adjust the thermostat. She'd always had a soft spot for lost things, ever since her brother vanished on a hiking trip 5 years ago. He was never found, only a backpack and a single boot. Since then, she'd learned to listen for grief, even when it wore armor. Meanwhile, in the precinct garage, a janitor named Micah, mid-50s, slight limp, baseball cap permanently affixed to his head, was slowly sorting through old inventory boxes from the evidence locker. Micah had been a mechanic before an accident cost him half the use of his left hand. Now he worked nights, humming blues songs to himself and moving slower than most would allow. But he saw everything. That night, he found something he hadn't meant to, a long-forgotten file marked Operation Broken Talon, handler debrief. Back in the interrogation room, Catherine opened the envelope she'd carried in. Inside was a letter, creased, folded, and fragile. My brother's final letter. We got it 2 days before the knock on the door. My mom framed it, but made a copy for me. I never understood one line until tonight. She read aloud. There's a man here they call Hawk. He trains dogs, but he fights like a bear and prays like a ghost. Today he stepped between me and a bullet meant for someone else. If I don't come back, tell Mom he's the reason I got one more day. Jonas stared at the letter like it was fire. His lip quivered. No one's ever read that out loud before, he whispered. Catherine leaned forward slightly. My family owes you everything, Jonas. But you disappeared. What? He shrugged. I thought they'd blame me. I lived. Jeremy didn't. The others didn't. Echo came back. That was enough. From the hallway, Sarah stepped inside with 2 steaming mugs. Coffee. You both look like you could use some. Her voice was casual, but she set the cups down with more care than necessary. Catherine took a slow sip, then said, I want to help you, Jonas. There's a program through the Veterans Housing Coalition. You qualify, and I'll personally work on your VA file. Jonas shook his head gently. I don't want a parade. You won't get one, she replied. You'll get what you earned. Echo let out a soft whine, nuzzling Jonas's thigh. That dog still knows you, Catherine said, and you're not the only one who remembers. Jonas looked down at the gloves, then at the 2 women in front of him. Slowly, almost like he had to relearn the motion, He extended his hand across the table. It trembled. Catherine took it. It was not just a handshake. It was a hand reaching out of years of ice. And finally, someone reaching back. The rain came suddenly that night, not as a drizzle or whisper, but a heavy downpour, smacking the pavement with such force it felt like nature was trying to drown something it couldn't forgive. Flagstaff, often dry and quiet after dark, pulsed with tension that no one could quite name. At the edge of the city's historic downtown, the modest, two-story brick building of the Flagstaff Police Department glowed dimly through foggy window panes. Inside, most of the officers were just finishing their midnight rotation. It had been a calm day. Until now, Jonas sat alone in a small office that Sarah had cleared for him temporarily. The desk was a clutter of forgotten paperwork, and the old swivel chair groaned every time he shifted. Echo lay on a wool blanket beside the radiator, chest rising and falling in soft rhythm, his scarred ears twitching to the thunder. Jonas was reading. Not much, just an old paperback copy of the things they carried someone had left behind. The edges were water-damaged. The words were too familiar. Sarah, who had taken a liking to Jonas since learning his story, knocked gently on the doorframe and leaned in. She wore a navy hoodie under her department vest, damp from the sudden rain. Her curly red hair was untied tonight, hanging in waves down her back. "You doing okay in here?" she asked. Jonas looked up. "I've had worse barracks." She smiled. "Fair. I brought cocoa, if you want it. Don't tell the captain. I make it with real milk." Before Jonas could answer, a sharp bang echoed from downstairs. Not thunder. Glass. Then a second crash, followed by the unmistakable whoosh of fire meeting oxygen. "What was that?" Sarah whispered, already turning back into the hall. From the lower level came shouting. A plume of dark smoke began rising from the stairwell. "Fire in the archives," someone yelled. Chaos bloomed like a dark flower. In the chaos, the station's fire alarm screamed to life. Emergency lights bathed the walls in pulsing red. Sarah grabbed Jonas's arm, but he pulled away. "Where's Echo?" he asked. "Still in the office." "I'll get him." "No," Jonas said, his voice cutting through the noise. "Get out. I know fire better than you." Without waiting, Jonas turned and ran toward the smoke-filled corridor. Sarah shouted his name, but he was already gone. Downstairs, flames had begun curling up the walls of the evidence storage wing. Boxes of old case files and fuel from cleaning supplies fed the inferno. Sprinklers hadn't kicked in. The system had failed in last month's inspection and was still pending repair. That detail, buried in city paperwork, now meant hell. Jonas navigated through the hallway by memory and instinct. The smoke was thick, acrid. Heat blistered the air. He pulled a damp shirt from a laundry bin and tied it around his mouth. Every step sent fire licking at his boots. Echo had been moved earlier to the rear kennels temporarily while his primary quarters were cleaned. Jonas made it to the kennel door, locked electronically. Of course, a metal override box hung nearby, already glowing with sparks. No time. He grabbed the nearest fire extinguisher, aimed it at the hinges, and slammed it again and again until metal bent under pressure and heat. Inside, Echo barked once sharply. He was coughing, dazed but alive. "Come here, boy," Jonas rasped. Echo limped to the front, his eyes red and wet. Jonas pulled him out, cradled the dog's torso despite the weight, and staggered back toward the hallway. A support beam creaked above him. The floor groaned. Somewhere nearby, glass shattered. He ducked low and pushed forward, flame to his left, collapsed ceiling to his right. They broke through the lobby just as firefighters burst in from the front. Two officers rushed forward to grab Echo, who collapsed but was breathing. Jonas dropped to one knee, coughing, face blackened with soot. A moment later, he felt a pair of hands lifting him. Sarah and another officer, Vincent, a stout man with a silver wedding ring and a face line from 20 years on the night shift. Outside, the rain was still falling. Catherine arrived minutes later, her cruiser skidding into the lot. She ran to the cordon, coat soaked, hair sticking to her face. When she saw Jonas being treated by EMTs, she froze. "What happened?" "Arson," Sarah said, her voice hoarse. "Someone threw accelerant through the records room." We're still checking surveillance. But it was intentional. Inside one of the ambulances, a paramedic was patching a burn along Jonas's left arm. He refused oxygen until echo had been checked. Echo was weak, but stable. Jonas kept his hand on the dog's back the entire time. An officer approached Catherine. Officer Taylor, young, slim, meticulous, usually too nervous to speak unless spoken to. He handed her a tablet. "Ma'am, we have footage." She looked. The security cam showed a figure in a black hoodie lobbing a Molotov through the evidence window. Catherine's face hardened. "Brent Lasker," she whispered. Sarah looked over. "Who?" Catherine's voice was ice. "Ex-con. Domestic arson. We put him away 8 years ago. He swore revenge when he got out." Vincent added, "He knew Echo was here. He was after him." Back in the ambulance, Jonas looked at Catherine as she approached. Her expression had softened, a rare thing for her. She stopped in front of him and took a breath. "You didn't have to go in there," she said. He didn't answer at first. Then he looked up, voice rough. "He would have gone in for me." The silence hung heavy. Finally, Catherine extended her hand. Jonas hesitated. Then he took it. From that day on, everything changed. Not because Jonas saved a dog, but because everyone saw what it meant, that there are things worth running back in a fire for. The courtroom was warmer than expected, considering the icy wind outside. It was one of those late winter mornings in Flagstaff where the sun offered light, but no heat. Patches of snow clung to the courthouse steps like forgotten scarves, and the scent of old pine wood lingered faintly in the air. Inside, rows of polished benches held more than just the usual crowd. There was tension. There was anticipation. Jonas sat quietly at the defendant's table, dressed in a clean button-down shirt that Officer Sarah Bellamy had lent him, along with a borrowed navy tie knotted a little too tight. His face was clean-shaven for the first time in weeks, and his unruly gray hair had been tamed by Vincent, the night officer who also happened to be decent with a pair of clippers. Jonas looked uncomfortable, not from fear, but from the weight of being seen. He hadn't stood in front of a crowd since his final debrief after Afghanistan. Beside him sat Echo, leashed but alert. The German shepherd's eyes swept the room like a soldier on patrol. He wore no vest today, only a quiet dignity and a small scar visible beneath his left ear. On the opposite side of the room stood Assistant District Attorney Evelyn Carrington. She was a sharp-featured woman in her late 40s with black-framed glasses, a sleek gray blazer, and an expression that spoke more of procedure than passion. Known for her textbook approach to law, Evelyn rarely deviated from protocol, but her fair handling of cases had earned her quiet respect in a town where politics often overshadowed justice. Judge Walter Marbury presided today, a lean man in his early 70s with thin spectacles balanced on the end of his nose and a reputation for patience so long that even time seemed to slow down in his courtroom. Marbury had served as a legal advisor to the Arizona National Guard in the early 90s, though he rarely spoke of it. Catherine Doyle sat quietly in the front row, in uniform, her badge gleaming. She looked every inch the commanding officer, shoulders squared, hair pulled tight, voice unreadable. Next to her was Sarah, who wore civilian clothes for once. Jeans, a green jacket, and worry plain on her face. Evelyn rose to begin. "Your Honor, this case concerns a misdemeanor trespassing charge and minor property damage. The defendant, Mr. Jonas Remington, was found sheltering in an abandoned fire station without permission. There is no dispute regarding the facts." She glanced at Jonas, then continued. "However, I have been informed by multiple parties, both within and outside the department, that this case may involve additional context, and I will yield briefly to the defense for preliminary statements." Jonas's court-appointed attorney hadn't shown. Illness. It was Sarah, bold as ever, who had filed an emergency petition for Catherine Doyle to speak on his behalf, not as legal counsel, but as a direct witness to material character and circumstance. Judge Marbury tilted his head. "Chief Doyle, are you requesting the floor?" "I am, Your Honor. With your permission." The judge nodded. Catherine rose slowly. "I'm not here in a legal capacity today, but in a personal one. Jonas Remington is not just a defendant. He is a former staff sergeant in the United States Army, who served with distinction for over 2 decades. He trained K-9 units for combat scenarios and high-risk deployments, including a dog known to us as Echo. She gestured to the dog at Jonas's side. Echo perked up, ears twitching at the sound of his name. Catherine continued. During an ambush in Kandahar in 2011, Sergeant Remington pulled 2 wounded soldiers and his K-9 partner from an active kill zone while under heavy fire. My brother was one of those soldiers. He died later from unrelated injuries, but he credited Jonas with saving his life in his final letter home. There was a collective silence in the room. Jonas was nominated for the Bronze Star with Valor, but his records were misplaced following his medical discharge. I've obtained confirmation from the Department of Defense last night. She produced a sealed envelope, and I asked the court to consider this in any judgment today. Evelyn Carrington remained still, then slowly stood. Your Honor, the prosecution does not dispute these new findings. In light of the evidence and the testimony of multiple verified military witnesses who are present here today, she gestured to the back of the courtroom, where 5 men and 2 women stood, each wearing either parts of a uniform or military league jackets. We would support a motion to dismiss all charges. Judge Marbury blinked, slowly, then looked down at the bench in front of him. I served once, he said, voice low. Not like you, Sergeant, but I wore the uniform. I remember what it meant. He turned toward Jonas. Would you care to say anything, Mr. Remington? Jonas stood slowly. Echo rose with him. I didn't break in to cause trouble, he said. It was cold. I was tired. I didn't know where else to go. That's all. His words weren't dramatic, but their honesty rang clear. Judge Marbury set down his pen. This court finds the charges against Mr. Remington dismissed with prejudice. His record shall be cleared, and his veteran status formally recognized by this court. He paused, then gently added, and thank you, Staff Sergeant Remington, for everything. A slow ripple began, first among the veterans in the back row, then Sarah, then Catherine. The room stood. There was no cheering, only respectful, thunderous applause. Echo barked once, softly. Outside the courthouse, the wind had died. The wind carried a softer edge that morning. It rustled the curtains like a breath through half-opened lips, fluttering sunlight into the corners of Jonas's new apartment. Perched 3 floors up in a modest brick complex near the edge of Flagstaff's Old Town district, the unit overlooked a quiet park scattered with pine trees and the occasional jogger tracing frozen trails. It wasn't grand, just 1 bedroom, a kitchenette, and walls painted eggshell white. But for Jonas Remington, it was more space than he had known in years. The Veterans Housing Coalition had fast-tracked his placement after the court decision, citing not only his clean legal slate, but also the overwhelming show of community support at the trial. The apartment had arrived with the basics: a twin bed, a fold-out couch, and a donated microwave from a couple down the hall who'd once lost their own son in Iraq. The rest, Jonas added slowly, bit by bit, like rediscovering how to build a life. That morning, he stood at the small bathroom mirror, shaving with an old brass-handled razor he'd carried since Kandahar. His reflection stared back at him, marked by crow's feet, softened jowls, and a gaze that no longer flinched from the past. A towel hung neatly on the rack. His military dog tags rested beside a small ceramic bowl on the counter. For once, he wasn't preparing to go anywhere. He was simply existing. Echo arrived just after 9 a.m., escorted by Officer Sarah Bellamy, who had taken on the unofficial role of Echo's guardian when he wasn't on light-duty visits. The German shepherd trotted inside, as if the space were already familiar, tail swaying gently. At 8 years old now, Echo had grown quieter, his eyes more thoughtful than reactive. Still lean, still dignified, he carried with him the calm of a soldier long retired, content to rest yet ever watchful. Jonas dropped to one knee and greeted him with a low whistle. "Morning, old boy." Echo patted over, resting his head against Jonas's chest. "Novarks, no dramatics." Just the hum of recognition. Sarah stepped in behind him, holding a cardboard tray with 2 coffees and a paper bag. Her usual police uniform had been replaced by a dark olive green coat and denim jeans. Without the badge and belt, she looked younger, but her eyes bore the same steady weight. Loss and persistence had shaped her in quiet ways. "Thought you might want breakfast that wasn't made in a microwave," she said, placing the tray on the kitchenette counter. Jonas nodded. "Appreciate it." She leaned against the wall, sipping her own drink. "You settling in okay?" Hard to get used to silence when you've lived with noise for years. But it's a good silence. Sarah smiled faintly. "I think the silence missed you." Before more words could be exchanged, a knock came at the door. Sarah opened it to reveal Chief Catherine Doyle, still in uniform. Though her coat was unzipped and a deep burgundy scarf coiled around her neck, she held a small box wrapped in brown paper and twine. Her cheeks were red from the cold, but her presence was composed as always. "Good morning, Sergeant," she said with a half-smile. Jonas chuckled. "It's just Jonas now, Chief. Then I'm just Catherine." She stepped inside, unwrapping the box as she spoke. "I brought something, a small thank you." Jonas took the package, carefully peeling the twine away. Inside, wrapped in layers of tissue, was a blackwood frame holding a photograph. 3 figures under a harsh Afghan sun. On the left, Jeremy Doyle, beaming in his desert fatigues. In the center, a young Echo, ears upright, eyes bright, still full of the energy of youth. And on the right, Jonas, younger by a decade, his arm slung over Jeremy's shoulder, smiling in a way he hadn't done in years. He stared at the photo in silence. "My mom found it," Catherine said softly. Jeremy sent a copy home. It was tucked behind another frame. Jonas's hand trembled slightly as he set it on the wall shelf beside the window. The frame caught the morning light, casting a soft reflection. "You gave us the last words we ever got from him," Catherine continued. "That letter wouldn't exist without you. And that dog? He's only here because you taught him not just how to fight, but how to feel safe again." Jonas turned away for a moment, swallowing against the tightness in his throat. He walked slowly to the window, hands clasped behind his back. The wind outside stirred the pine branches below, carrying with it the scent of damp bark and the far-off sound of city waking up. He spoke without turning. "I spent a long time thinking no one remembered, that maybe I didn't matter anymore." Sarah stepped beside him, her voice quiet. "You mattered every time you saved someone, even if they never got the chance to say so." Jonas looked down at Echo, who had curled into a patch of sunlight on the rug, one ear twitching at the sound of traffic outside. He gave a soft sigh. "There it is again," Jonas whispered. "The wind. It doesn't forget." Catherine tilted her head. "What do you mean?" He turned, eyes clearer than they had been in years. "My father used to say the wind keeps names. Whispers them when no one else will. I think mine stopped being a whisper today." An Echo, as if in answer, lifted his head and placed it gently on Jonas's foot, eyes half-lidded, tail giving one slow thump. The room held stillness. Not the silence of absence, but the quiet of something mended. Sometimes, the ones who gave everything are left forgotten, wandering in silence, waiting for someone to remember their name. But even after decades of pain and loss, kindness, loyalty, and courage still have the power to bring healing. Jonas's story reminds us that no one is ever truly invisible. Not to those they saved, not to those they loved, and not to the one who sees all. In your daily life, take a moment to look a little closer. That quiet man at the bus stop, that elderly neighbor, that stray dog who seems to wait by the gate. Someone out there has a story, and sometimes they're just waiting for someone to listen. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who still believes in honor, redemption, and second chances. Leave a comment with amen if you believe heroes still walk among us, even if they wear no medals. And don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more stories of faith, hope, and healing. May God bless you and everyone watching this.